This is the story of how a witch hunter inquisitor earned himself the reputation in all the kingdoms and even before the gods that he himself has a tiny, let's say, dagger to keep this video family friendly. The reason for that was an out-of-control tavern brawl and an over-enthusiastic Fey bard with a grudge. But let's start at the beginning and meet the party, gathered by the call of an old friend. The professor was in search of someone who could take up the mantle of his old adventuring party, the Blue Mug. What none of them knew was that the legacy they were about to inherit means so much more than just the retirement of an old adventurer and friend. The fate of all mortal realms, as well as the 12 gods themselves, will be the responsibility of this group of misfits. Welcome adventurer, my name is Korok DM and I create videos about D&D and world building. I upload a new video every second Thursday and live stream some fantasy map making on every off week. In this video I want to try out something new. I will go low on animation and editing and show you a speed paint of a map related to the story I'm about to share with you. This gives me more time to focus on the story. Let me know if you like the new format. The story is from my Vermächtnis or Legacy campaign, back from when I still ran Pathfinder. The plot is inspired by the Carrion Crown adventure path, but heavily modified to fit into my setting and to tell the story I had in mind. Before we start the story, riddle me this. Brought to the table, cut and served, never eaten. Write your guesses down in the comments. I will give you the answer in the next video, as well as a shoutout for the first one to solve the riddle. The solution to last week's riddle is silence. The first one who got it right was S-Man Sam. Now let's see what we got in the chest today. It was the first day of spring, and the inexperienced party was about to break up their camp, while the professor was studying his spellbook. Everyone was busy packing up their stuff. Everyone except Malva, a Githlein from the Feywild and the bard of this group. She practiced her juggling skills with everything she could find, including her platypus familiar called Gunther. She and the professor were old friends and she learned a bit of magic from him while she attended the university. She was not actually a student there, she just decided to show up one day. However, she and the professor had a story reaching a bit farther back. Originally, she just wanted to visit an old friend when she appeared at the university, but decided to have some fun while she was there. Now she wants her own adventure instead of listening to and telling stories of others. The next member of the party I want to introduce is Kraig, a Tango with a fable for fancy hats. He was exiled from the port city that he and his kin called home for a crime that he never actually committed, but the elders didn't want to listen. During the time that he and his trusty companion Frida the mule spent wandering aimlessly through the land, he saved the professor from some muggers that tried to rob him in a dark alleyway. In return, the professor gave him a place he could return to when he needed the company of a friend, or a safe place to hide from the authorities. The third member of the party was the wood elf barbarian Nymeria. She was on the journey of proving, a rite of passage that every adolescent Silver's wood elf undertakes. It took her far beyond the edges of the Volshan, the large forest she called home. The only companion that was always by her side was her otter Lasso, who had a particular fable for collecting smooth rocks and arranging them in a pile. She met the professor when he was visiting her clan, and she helped him on his mission. Now she joined him again to see more of the world her tribe has hidden from her for so long. Last but not least is Callan, a human inquisitor and witch hunter. He came to the nation of Freistand because of increased rumors of witchcraft. He once joined the professor on one of his expeditions and managed to save him from a trap. Now the professor wants to make true on a promise he gave Callan back then, by giving him the opportunity to become part of a special adventuring group. Even though the professor has not explained yet what this all means, Callan trusts his old friend. His experience so far in Freistand are mixed. Most of the common people don't trust a foreigner, and he has a hard time to get his authority and expertise acknowledged. But things are about to change, even though not in a way he's expecting. The sun was already setting when the party arrived at the Star Drop Inn, next to a beautiful lake. They decided to stay here for the night to enjoy a pint of ale and the local cuisine. Besides them, there were not a lot of guests, for the spring season only started recently, and few people travel in the cold winter. A quick side note on the seasons in Gazelion. They are not changing as smoothly like in our world, but have a rather strict, abrupt transition. Large storms rage over the land and wash away the snow, leaving spring flowers behind. The other guests were a group of craftsmen looking for work in the capital of Freistand. They blamed the involvement of the former nobles in the Council of the Free People for their hardship and were here to drown their sorrows. Also present were a small group of mercenaries called the Skilpadde, a large mercenary society operating from the kingdom in the north. The last group consisted of 2 people, one knight and trusted guardian and servant to the other person, a woman with long black hair, a black dress with long black gloves, Lady Anastasia, former noble and now member of the Council of the People. For some inexplicable reason, the mood in the inn was quite tense. And here our heroes yet to be had their great entrance, but nobody bat an eye. As the evening went on and more ale went over the counter into the thirsty throats of the guests, the tension in the room only grew larger. One thing led to another, and soon the workers decided to tell Lady Anastasia what they thought was wrong with the country. However, due to the heavy influence of alcohol, they decided to use a fist-heavy form of sign language. The party was quick to side with Lady Anastasia and her guard, but one of them brought not quite the fitting weapon to a fist fight. The Inquisitor nearly decapitated one of the workers with his longsword. Luckily for the poor lad, the leader of the Skilpadde mercenaries intervened, and the rest of the party could persuade him to put away his sword. After Lady Anastasia retreated to her room, the party spent the rest of the evening in the company of the mercenaries. Their leader introduced herself as Jelena, the Wolf Slayer. She took a liking to most of the party members, especially the strong Nymeria was just to the liking of her mercenary soul. Kellen, on the other hand, made a bad impression by bringing a sword to a tavern brawl. Only a person with a really small dagger would be in need to compensate with such a long sword. They also met a young half-orc mercenary named Zaria this evening. She will join the party at a later day, but for now they were just enjoying a drink together, while Malve couldn't let go of the whole dagger story, teasing Kellen and trying to examine it to see if Jelena was right. In the morning, the professor got a mysterious message that seemed to upset him. He stormed outside. Before Craig or Malve could catch up to him, he told them he would meet them later in the orchard, Obstgarten, and disappeared through a portal. Inside, the others noticed a grumpy-looking dwarf carving a piece of wood of some sorts. He regularly glanced over to the group. When Craig and Malve returned and the rest told them about this ominous dwarf, they were unsure what to do about it, if anything needs to be done at all. Every party member but Malve. She sat Gunter on her chair to take her place for the moment and walked over to the carving dwarf to ask him what he was doing. Obviously she heard many stories of dwarfs and knew to bring him a pint of beer. Nothing better to befriend him, she thought. The dwarf didn't really pay the beer much attention, but asked Malve for one of her blossoms from her hair, which she happily parted with. The dwarf laid his woodwork on the table to take the blossom. It was a mask with engravings, the holy symbol of Kellen, a hat just like Craig's with a crow feather, and other symbols, some roughly resembling the party members, others totally unfamiliar. They decided to finish their breakfast and get going. It was a long way before they would reach their destination and hopefully get some answers from their old friend, like why he departed so suddenly without explanation. While the party's getting ready to head to Obstgarten, I would like to use the time and ask you to give this video a like if you have enjoyed it so far. And make sure to subscribe and ring the bell to get advantage on perception checks to never miss out on one of my videos in the future. After a few days of travel and debating the question what happens to a Fae when they die, and if they have an afterlife like the mortals on the material plane do, and what the role of the gods in all of this is, you know, normal traveling conversations when you're on the road with Malve, or probably any bard originating from the Feywild for that matter, they reach their destination eventually. Obstgarten is a small place on the edges of the Fuchswald forest in the hinterland of Freistand. The people here live simple lives. They rarely meet strangers if they don't trade their fruit harvest in the city or with neighboring settlements. The sight of travelers, especially of such a diverse group of adventurers, attracts a lot of attention. After spending some time being the attraction of the whole orchard, Malve and Craig decided to pay the temple a visit, one of the few temples dedicated to an ancient rather than the 12 gods. In particular, the god Oberon, god of nature and the seasons. They had a heated debate, for Oberon was once the father of the Fae, but left them without guidance to their own when the gods turned their backs on the Feywild. However, Malva hoped that the priestess might hold at least some answers to the many questions she had. In the meantime, Nymeria and Callan paid the Elder a visit, to ask if by any chances the professor might have shown up, but the Elder only gave them a letter from him, telling them to wait here for his return. Both of them were a bit frustrated, but enjoyed learning more about the history of the land from the Elder, once himself a noble who fled to the hinterlands when the revolution took down the monarchy. He belonged to the group who welcomed the change and the end of nobility, but he also knew that it would be wisest to leave the capital. Shortly after Count Karamak resigned and handed over the power to the council, treacherous nobles that didn't want to step down unleashed a terrible armored monster onto their enemies. It was the Professor and the Blue Mug that ended the conflict before a civil war could break loose. Even though the monster was never defeated, the attacks stopped and the beast was never seen again. In the evening the party joined back together to share what each of them had found out, while a spring storm was raging outside. The drinks in the tavern where the locals gathered were watered down leftovers from the winter, but it was better than nothing. They grew frustrated as none of the people here had any idea what the professor had in mind for them to do here. Most of them didn't even know him. As they were contemplating about what they should do next and got to know each other a little bit better in the process, they heard the doors of the tavern burst open. The local blacksmith limped inside, holding his bleeding head. "They took her! They took my little girl!" After calming him down, he told them how he and his 10-year-old little daughter were securing the smith for the upcoming storm, when they see greenish creatures dropping on them from the sky. They hit his head hard, and the last thing he saw before he passed out was how she got dragged off into the woods by these creatures. The party immediately decided to hunt after them to save the girl. Using his tracking skills, Callan led the group into the Fuchswald with the help of Nymeria's knowledge of hunting in the woods. Tired from the long day of travel to Obstgarten and the chase after those foul creatures through the raging storm, they decided to make camp for the night and continue the hunt in the morning. In the morning, the trees had begun to bloom and the first spring flowers were sprinkled in throughout the woods. Even though the rain hadn't made things easier for them, they followed the tracks to the edges of a secluded clearing. On a small hill in its middle, the ruins of an old tomb could be spotted. A watch patrol of goblins had almost discovered them first, but thanks to Crike's keen eyes they managed to take them out before they could raise the alarm. It was unusual for goblins to behave so organized, but instead of thinking on it too hard, they decided to act while most of the goblins were probably asleep. On their way down the stairs, they triggered an alarm trap, and a fight in the main chambers broke out. However, the handful of goblins were barely a match for the party. The fact that most of them were in the process of waking up might have given them an advantage in this situation. In the middle of the room stood a stone baptismal font without water. The murals on the wall are depicting knights fighting evil and an engraving of the oath written in an old dialect. It seemed to be a knight order from the time when the kingdom was still whole, before it broke into smaller territories during the Serpent War 50 years ago. Deeper in the tomb they found the daughter of the blacksmith trapped in a cage, guarded by a vile-looking bugbear and a goblin shaman. The negotiations quickly drifted into combat. The bugbear landed some excruciating hits on the party, but in the end they preserved and won the fight. Callan captured the shaman alive for interrogation, and with its help found a hidden stash of potions. The band of goblins seemed to be working for an individual called the Wolfman, and was sent to desecrate this tomb in a ritual to weaken some sort of chains. Despite promising otherwise, Callan executed the goblin. "It would have been too dangerous to let this terrorist go, even if it has cooperated." The room in which they were fighting seemed to be void of any form of coffin or other means of burial. Just a statue depicting a halfling knight standing there extending one hand as though expecting something to be placed inside of it. They found a clue in form of an engraving on the shield he was holding in his other hand. "If you want to give it, I let you in. A life shall bind it, so will it be. Easy to break, so much harder to maintain. To keep it, you have to give it to someone first." The answer to this riddle? An oath. Whatever it is the statue is hiding, it wants to be given an oath, and the party happened to stumble over one just one room before. After writing the oath down, Malva and Crike volunteered to give the statue what it wanted. "Dieser Eid soll mich auf Lebzeit binden. Ich werde den Feind nicht fürchten, wenn ich an der Seite meiner Kameraden stehe, ob in der Finsternis schreitend oder im Licht wandernd. Wo auch immer sich der Unhold erhebt, werde ich bereitstehen, kein Opfer, zu groß, um ihn zu bannen. Hier stehe ich, so hört meine Worte. Ich bin die Fackel in der Nacht, der Wächter an der Schwelle. After finishing these words, a secret passage next to the statue opened, leading into the real tomb of the Night Order. The first thing that catches their eye was a wall painting showing a desperate knight at the edge of a dark abyss. The ghost of the halfling knight greets them and tells them that their arrival has been foreseen, that someday someone would come to pick up the torch and fight the Unhold, an ancient god and the embodiment of evil. It is sealed away for now, but its henchmen are working tirelessly to free him. They would be the successors of the Order, as they were once the successors of the heroes that came before them. He gave them handles made out of a strange gold-like metal, the weapons of light. These shall guide them on their journey and reveal the answers in time's due. These handles manifest a weapon made of pure light, able to strike darkness itself. Kellen's handle manifested a bastard sword called Hexenfluch, Witchbane. Nymeria got an elven scimitar named Shivra Alun, Morning Dew. The Kukri Karasu Ka, meaning Crowfang, for Crike, and Malva's handle manifested a mistletoe ring called Shenlela. The names engraved on the weapons in each of their own native tongues. Only Malva decided to keep the Sylvan name without translating it. The ghost faded, having fulfilled its duty, and finally can find his final rest. The legacy of the Knights of Twilight were passed on to the next generation. I hope you liked this little story from one of the past games I've run. It was an amazing time playing this campaign with some of my friends. Finishing the final chapter of their story took us 3 years of more or less weekly playing sessions. In this video, the seeds of the saga of Kellen's dagger were sown. Malva never forgot the bar fight and Yelena's teasing of Kellen. But what caused her to hold a grudge against this Inquisitor? If you like this format, I would love to continue the retelling of their story. What do you say about the map making in the background? Do you like it, or would you prefer it if I keep the video formats as it has been so far? If this is the first video from me, you might want to check out one of my other videos, like my thoughts on fantasy races, or you might be interested in a one-shot I created more recently. It was a lot of fun creating this video for you, and great to have a reason to read through my old notes and relive some of my favorite moments as a DM. Thanks for sticking with me till the end. Your Dungeon Master for this video was Korok DM, and I hope you join me in the next one.